everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. We are back. Well, I'm back. I ran into a bit of a bug, but thankfully I'm all better. With me again is Lady Byron, Lord of Vampires and all things spooky.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
So, Lady Byron, would you like to talk about, or tell us what we are doing for this episode? What we are talking about?
Yes, our subject today is a topic that is near and dear to my cold undead heart, and that is vampires.
Are we talking about Count Von Count 2, or is he out of the equation? Out of the equation.
I like to think that Count from Sesame Street is a vampire. It gives kids an early taste into what they could be. And, again, not all of them are evil undead bloodsuckers. Maybe they're your friendly neighborhood vampire.
One vampire, two vampire, three vampire. Ha ha ha.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, what we're gonna do is Lady Byron is actually going to talk about the mythology, the history, the strengths and weaknesses, and interpretations of different vampires throughout Dungeons and Dragons, throughout the entire media. And she's gonna take lead on this. And we're gonna start off. I'm just gonna start off with a question, and I'm gonna let her take it from going forward because this is the big one that everybody's gonna ask. Um, how does in D&D how does one uh contract vampirism, or could you actually define what vampirism is for our uneducated viewers?
Sure. Well, vampirism is normally the name kind of given to the disease or curse that turns one into a vampire. And in D&D, usually a vampire would bite someone, exchange blood, and then they could be turned into a vampire, but more likely they'd be turned into a vampire spawn. And just in D&D terms, that's someone who, a vampire spawn is a vampire, but not the full powers. So they would be able to bite and attack, but they won't be able to turn people, and they're under the control of the more powerful vampire.
Okay, and
And
oh, sorry.
it's all good. So that's one interpretation of the vampirism mythos. Most common, you've seen in media that turning someone into a vampire requires an exchange of blood, where the human or the mortal will drink from the vampire and the vampire will drink from the human. Sometimes it needs to be buried in order to die and come back as a vampire, but again, not in every case. The wonderful thing about vampires is that the myth of the vampire has been around for such a long time. It's had so many different kind of iterations and different takes on different things. So you can see things like Blade, where they have a Blade as a sort of a half human, half vampire, kind of a hybrid who can walk in the day, but he needs to drink blood to survive. Or you have um, vampires from maybe the Underworld series, where they were fighting with the werewolves constantly. Or maybe you have vampires more classic, like Dracula and things like that. Dracula's been in many movies, had many different actors portray him, and so again, it just kind of depends on the mythos what traits they might have, but a lot of times they have things like supernatural speed, supernatural strength, keen senses, great smell and hearing, and a lot of times you see vampires have the ability to kind of hear a pulse or smell blood from a really far distance, and they can run really fast, they can jump really high, they're also quite strong, so it's something that we see a lot that way. They're able to overpower their victims, as they do need to eat or drink blood to sustain themselves. And alongside that, a lot of vampire stories have the kind of edge case where a vampire who doesn't feed, sometimes they go feral, they turn into a more monstrous beast, and they lose the last shred of humanity that they ever may have had. Sometimes they just kind of go dormant and more of a comatose kind of a state for the vampire. Um, you see vampires in basically all popular media. There's, like we mentioned, Blade. There's also Morbius. So even comic books have had vampires. and Morbius now also getting a movie alongside Blade. Um, Stories have existed for hundreds of years, Dracula being one of the early ones, but also we see stories of Vlad the Impaler, who was also kind of maybe mistaken for a vampire, as there's kind of a famous tale that Vlad set upon an opposing army at dusk with the sun to his back so that they would be blind. He released a horde of diseased bats, attacked the opposing army, but with the sun in their eyes, the angle of the attack, it looked like Vlad turned into a cloud of bats. So that's something that we see in popular media too, that vampires can shape change, turn into bats, maybe wolves. Sometimes they can turn into mist. Um, and a lot of times they use these kinds of things to escape if things aren't going their way. And a lot of popular vampire stories also include sleeping in a coffin, which, if you think about, makes a lot of sense from maybe a security standpoint. Vampires are weak during the day. If they can seal themselves up in kind of a locked box, that could be really good for their strength and their security of themselves. A lot of vampires use their coffins to heal. So another aspect we see of vampires is that they can heal wounds, heal body parts that have been lost. Again, the Blade franchise showed this quite a few times, where they had arms or eyes lost, and they would heal them over time. So the coffin is a very important thing for a vampire. Uh, Common vampire stories can also include their home dirt. So we see shown in movies where a coffin is transported inside a larger crate that's full of dirt. So this ties back to kind of the vampire mythology that they need to carry a piece of themselves and their homeland wherever they go. Otherwise, they will be weakened. They might turn to a more bestial version, or they may go more comatose, depending on the story. Um, with popular games like World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire the Requiem, and with Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, including vampires, we see different powers that translate more into player powers. So um, things like the ability to read minds, charm people, hide in a crowd, stealth really well. These are a bit more supernatural gifts that sometimes vampires can enjoy. And alongside their supernatural gifts, that includes their obviously long lives or a long undead existence, and their ability to withstand most normal attacks. A lot of times you see in vampire stories that they need to be killed with magic weapons or silver weapons, or holy weapons of some kind. Daylight is also usually one of their weaknesses. They tend to stay inside or in their coffins when the sun's out. And so, some stories talk about holy relics like crosses or the Star of David and things like that. But some stories say that that's kind of individual to the vampire. So, um, one story that often gets overlooked when vampires are brought up is the short story, not necessarily the movie, but the short story "I Am Legend." The creatures in that story were, for all intents and purposes, vampires. But in that instance, they had basically taken whatever religion they were a part of in life. That is the objects that they were scared of in their undeath. So if they were Christian, then they would be scared of a cross. But if they were Jewish, then maybe it was the Star of David. So sometimes holy objects like that can scare vampires, but sometimes it does nothing to them. Um, Garlic is one of those things that we're not quite sure if that's truth or myth, but garlic is believed to be an anticoagulant, which means it helps blood flow and prevent blood clotting. So I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that vampires themselves may have started the myth that garlic would keep them away. If their victims consumed a lot of garlic, their blood would flow free and easy, and it would be easier to drink from them. So that's one of those things where we're not quite sure which one of those is true or not. Um, and yeah, they, as we've said, vampires mostly sustain themselves on blood, mostly the blood of human and humanoid creatures. They don't really like to drink from different creatures other than, like I said, the humanoid kind of species, because different animals or different creatures will have different compositions in their blood that could be damaging or downright deadly to a vampire. They can drink from animals like horse, mammals, pigs, things like that. Depends kind of again on the mythos where vampire might enjoy doing that, or they might see that as a necessary evil, where they don't enjoy it, but they don't want to, out themselves to the local human population by wantonly killing everyone. So they might try and stick to the shadows and stick to eating from the animals. Um, yeah. What do you think about vampires?
Well, I've always been of the opinion that they're scary, and the interpretations vary because there's a lot of like literature. There's
Mhm.
lots of literature around them, and they've been made quite famous, especially with Christopher Lee's version and Bram Stoker's
Mhm.
Dracula. And now I will say that the Twilight vampires do have one thing going for them, is that they show how a vampire is able to seduce or hypnotize a person. Although I have not actually watched all the films, one thing that they do is they do that particularly well, and they also show kind of like how werewolves and vampires are kind of like at each other's throats all the time, kind of like Underworld. And
Mhm.
I believe this is because they often trespass on their own like hunting grounds, but that I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, we're not quite sure where the original idea came from that vampires and werewolves are enemies, but it probably stems from the fact that werewolves consider themselves more natural, actually, because they're still a living creature. They just have a supernatural ability to transform. Sometimes to transform with the full moon, that sort of thing. Sometimes werewolves can transform in other times. And they see the vampires as wholly unnatural, undead, curse on the land sort of creature. Um, Werewolves also don't normally eat humans or use humans as a food source, but again, it kind of depends on the mythos. Where vampires see werewolves as lesser creatures, like dogs, mutts, mongrels, those kinds of things. Yeah, that's another aspect that vampire stories have touched on throughout the years.
Yeah, and sometimes this can end up going out with full out war, which is just
Mhm.
and it pardon the pun, it gets quite bloody.
Mhm.
So yeah, and also the whole thing behind Dracula is Dracula, like, is he immune? He's only weak to sunlight, or is that like what's the story with that? Like, is he immune to everything else except for the sunlight, or is that just based on interpretation?
Yeah, it's kind of based on interpretation, but Dracula is seen as an older vampire, and normally in vampire mythos, you kind of have this kind of watering down of the bloodline the farther you get from the first vampire, depending on the mythology. So Dracula being one of the older ones, he probably has way less weaknesses than a later generation of a vampire. But as far as I can recall, Dracula has the aversion to silver, aversion to mirrors as well, which kind of goes back to the silver thing. Mirrors back in the day used to be coated with silver in the back to make a reflective surface. And the kind of thinking was that vampires are cursed, unholy, unnatural creatures, and silver being pure, they can't see the reflection because they're cursed, right? Yeah, Dracula has that, again, stake to the heart, decapitation, and sunlight weaknesses, but most other things he's pretty well protected against.
Yeah, and isn't there like something like in other religions, like you said, like something like I don't know, like the statue of Buddha, would that work against a vampire? I mean, I've never heard of vampires migrating into, say, like Mongolia or China or any of the Far East countries. They tend to stay in the European area.
Well, I think that's mostly because that's where those stories were being written. But I don't see a reason why a vampire couldn't go to China. It's not outside the realm of possibility. But the vampire mythos kind of originated in Europe. So I think that's why most of the stories are set in Europe.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, if I remember correctly, Transylvania was an actual place before it was turned into Romania, or something around those lines.
Yeah, Transylvania is kind of a part of Romania. It's kind of a region. Yeah.
And so vampires, they don't have that funny accent where they're like, um, that's more endemic to the region that they have, or that's just so they can blend in. They actually just
hmm
talk normally. It's just they put on the accent to blend in.
Yeah, I think, vampires use that to their advantage, unlike other creatures like zombies or mummies or skeletons who are obviously other. They look so different. Vampires have the ability to blend in with their prey, and that might be adopting local fashion trends, adopting local accents, things like that, because it's easier for them to feed if they can gain the trust of the humans who they would eat.
Here's a really kind of messed up question. What would happen if Count Von Count um, bit Cookie Monster? What would happen there?
It's hard to say, but considering that they're all Muppets, I don't think that they have blood.
Well, there goes an entire generation of kids learning shows down the drain. Heck, heck, if Count Von Count was an actual vampire and he stuck to the vampire mythos, oh my god, all the Muppets would be easy prey, especially Big Bird. Oh
Mm.
god, Big Bird. I'm sorry, Big Bird.
So it's funny about Count Von Count the Muppet because somehow part of the vampire mythos has historically included some kind of aspects of obsessive compulsive disorder and kind of things like that. So Count is an example of that. It used to be the idea that if you spilled a bunch of seeds on the ground in front of a vampire, they wouldn't chase you. They'd have to stop and count the seeds. And Count Von Count is kind of an extension of that idea. He loves to count. It's kind of another aspect of the vampire mythos.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that Count Von Count is the best vampire, especially
Mm,
for little kids.
yeah, it's a great introduction a gentle introduction to some spookier things down the road.
Heck, don't like. Isn't there something about like he plays like a pipe organ? Isn't that considered like a
hmm
holy thing? Because that's often in churches.
Well, I think that pipe organs have been seen, yeah, historically in churches, but also in castles.
Ah,
And as we
yes.
all know, vampires love a good castle. They love to collect wealth. Again, I think that's probably going back to maybe some of their OCD tendencies. Uh, but they love to collect wealth, collect fancy things. And it's easy when you live for a really long time, if you can invest and things like that, especially now we have like the stock market and all those things. Easy for vampires to accumulate wealth. And, learning to play the organ maybe is something that a lot of them pick up because they have time to kill.
Ha ha. Pun intended. Anyway, anything else? Any other like facts or little tidbits that you know of? Like, how does one in D&D? How would one generally counter or combat a vampire usually?
Well, very much like other mythologies, vampires and Dungeon Dragons have weaknesses to sunlight, um, staking, and magical weapons. They also have another trait that we haven't mentioned yet, which is called vampire forbiddance. Um, this again may relate back to kind of some of their OCD tendencies, but the idea is basically that a vampire cannot enter a residence or other structure unless they've been explicitly invited. And that was something that we saw a lot on Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV show and then the Angel TV show. And they had to be invited in, and then there was a spell. Sometimes the players would, or the players, the characters on the show would cast a spell if they wanted to rid the or rescind the invitation. Um, so I guess if you can buy a house in Dungeons and Dragons and hide in that. Um, but vampires in Dungeons and Dragons are also harmed by running water. They take acid damage if they end their turn in running water, like stream, river, waterfall, things like that. Um, and they're obviously immune to radiant, or not immune. Sorry, they're weak to radiant damage. So holy weapons or blessed weapons can be a really great boon to the players. But in Dungeons and Dragons, vampires are quite high challenge rating, so it's something that a high level party would have to go up against.
Especially like
Let's
especially like a
no,
vampire lord or queen. Like yes, like vampires have queens and they have lords. They're like
mm-hmm.
the big bosses who command them. And this is one thing I've always been curious about. Not because I'm a guy, but I've always wondered. So like like something like the Bride of Dracula, like that one I've always found that interesting. So when a like if a female gets bitten and it turns, they don't immediately like gain like the ability to seduce, and they don't immediately adopt clothing to it specificate like the sexuality, but it's more they more prefer to do it subtly rather than like a male vampire who's more kind of more a little more aggressive about it, and they don't what's the word they dare I say it, vampires can be very like vampire queens can be very gentle, like, and the whole idea of like vampires naturally reproducing, not even gonna bring that image up, but just it's a fascinating idea. So if a vampire queen gives birth to a child, is that child going to be like a purebred, or is it going to be a hybrid, or is it going to be something different, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Let's talk about your world. What do vampires look like in your world?
Well, they have this they actually reside in a little place called Hallows Peak, aka Halloween Town.
Hmm.
So, and they have what they tend to do is that they don't like they follow a very specific rule where they don't actively like hunt humans, and since they can't drink the blood of undead, they don't have any other food source. But some humans do live in Howell's Peak, and what they'll do is they'll set up like a kind of like a blood donation site
Hmm.
so that they can feed off of that, or they will willingly let the vampire bite them, but they can only like drink so much blood because they don't want to die from the blood loss. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing they like to do is that they like to do the whenever like an outsider comes into Hollow's Peak, they'll do like the Halloween Town song, and then the vampires will just come out of the thing, and they'll just they'll do their thing, and or you'll be like walking around the place, and then all of a sudden you see a vampire that's hanging upside down. He's like, "Hello, welcome to our town."
Mm-hmm.
Or and they really like to joke around with the other undead, like I the like one joke that I like is that a vampire and a zombie are talking, and then they go up to a newcomer, and the vampire says, "Pardon me, my friend, is this your arm?" And then he, or is it or is that a skeleton? I don't remember, but the skeleton joke is also there too. I think I think it's the skeleton, but he's like, "Pardon me, my friend, is that your arm?" And he just picks it up and puts it back into his socket. Or say a skeleton walks into a bar, and he goes up to the bartender. The bartender says, "What will you have?" And he says, I'll have an ale and a mop." That's a classic joke. I've
I
told that
like
joke.
it.
Yeah, I've told that joke like a million times. It never gets old. And they basically they're just as human as you and me, except they're undead, and they're also retain their humanity by way of a little gem called the gem of life, which is buried somewhere within the radius of the town. So, and if that gem is ever destroyed, they go back to being regular undead, and then they start hunting humans, and all the other undead start being regular undead, and they don't and they're not very nice anymore. Even the mummies, they believe it or not, they act as kind of like medics. So like they'll take like the bandages off of their arm. Yeah, it's very
Nice.
Hallows Peak is a very strange place, and if you're afraid of anything like zombies or anything like that, or if you're especially afraid of spiders, do not go to Hallows Peak. I do not like spiders. Then again, I don't like anything, so there's that. Anyway, is that everything on this hour of education with Lady Byron, or
I
do you?
think we've talked about everything that we were going to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we get a an evil count one count laugh for the record?
I don't know if I can do an evil laugh, but I can try. Let me see. Like the Muppet, you mean?
Yeah, like dude, like count and then go ah
Ah,
ah ah.
ah.
Dramatic thunder.
Yes.
Not, I really have to revisit like the Underworld series. I have to watch the
Mm.
Blade series. I love the Blade series.
Oh yeah, the Blade movies are really good. I even enjoy the third one, even though I know that's unpopular opinion.
I haven't seen that one in a long time. Isn't that the one where the dog is like it opens up its mouth and it's got like, or is that?
I don't remember the specifics, but the third Blade movie is the one where they're trying to create a biological weapon to destroy all vampires forever.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I thought that was really,
WMDs.
really interesting. Yeah.
WMDs. That's a war
Oh,
crime.
well, maybe if you were a human living in a world of vampires, you might think differently.
Oh yeah, don't vampires have like familiars like that act
hmm
like kind of like spies? Like in the second Blade movie, they have like a guy who's a lawyer.
Yeah, they do have familiars. They have like you said, kind of like a legal team that's working for them. They also, it turns out that the sidekick that Blade had adopted in the second movie, spoilers, I guess, turned out to be a familiar as well.
Yeah,
And it turns
that's
out
the
he was
same that's the same
working
actor
with the
who plays
samples.
Daryl on The Walking Dead.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize it until I saw him, and then I'm like, oh crap, that's Daryl, and he was like really young. I actually like him in Blade 2. I'm not when we
Yeah.
get to the zombie episode, I'll kind of go into my little rant about The Walking Dead, but suffice to
Sure.
say, I kind of lost faith in Walking Dead.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Anyway, is
An
that
episode for another time, yeah.
yeah, is that it? Is that everything? Or do you want to sign off
Yeah.
now?
All right, everyone, stay spooky.
Yep. And we're gonna be working on trying to set up a Patreon page, and maybe some point we'll do a contest where you guys can send in like your spookiest fan art or something like that. Maybe we'll look into
Yeah.
that.
Or future topics for future episodes.
Future topics, yep. I definitely want to talk about the Tomb of Horrors. Oh god, the Tomb of Horrors.
Yes.
Don't make me go in there, coach. I am not ready for that.
Is anybody ever ready for that?
Well, that's basically the Tomb of Horrors is basically is when you hate people and you just want to see them suffer.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will be back next week. Same topic. What would you like to talk about next week? Do you want to talk about the zombies, or do you want to talk about something?
Yeah, let's do zombies.
Yay, zombies! I love zombies. All right. See you guys later.